Welcome to the 6-8 Culture Podcast, an international community where we share stories of transformation and restoration from the inside out, based on justice, kindness, and humility. Come journey with us. I'm your host, Rob McKinley. Today's guest holds an MBA, a Master's in Organizational Leadership, a law degree, and a special diploma in intellectual property. She's also used her creative communication skills in bringing social issues to the public's attention by writing and producing radio dramas and street theater with social messages. Her dedication to the empowerment of the underprivileged, her vision for social change, and knowledge about international issues have all led to her being awarded several honors. She oversaw the training of more than 17,000 police, government officials, and NGOs on the rescue and rehabilitation of individuals trapped in slavery and bringing criminals to justice. As a result, 10,000 individuals have been rescued from forced labor slavery. She has 9 years of leadership experience with International Justice Mission. In Delhi, India, she served as the Director of Operations and the Director of National Interventions. And in Chennai, India, she served as the Director of Legal. During her time with IJM, she worked extensively to impact the justice system by collaborating with state and local governments in India. Her position now is the Executive Director of IJM Canada, an organization that I hold in the highest esteem for their ongoing global work in the abolition of slavery, restoration to survivors, bringing criminals to justice, and strengthening justice systems. This is not an exhaustive list, and we'll hear more later in this interview. It's a joy to welcome this guest. And you, Canjanathoppil, welcome to the 6-8 Culture Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure and honor.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Anu. I trust and hope that I got the proper pronunciation of your surname in there.
You did.
Good. Well, I really, as I alluded to earlier, that I so appreciate the work that IJM does. I've had many interactions with them over the years, and the transformative work being done always leaves me amazed. Now, we'll hear more about IJM in a little bit, but I'd love to start with you, the person of Anu. Can you share a little bit about who you are on a personal level?
Oh, yes. A daughter to a shamelessly idealistic couple. My mother and father, they have challenged a whole lot of stereotypes, right from the role of a spouse. My mother and father have broken pretty much every single stereotype there is. Not just to come together as a family, but how they brought us up. I come from South Asia, and there are a lot of do's and don'ts that are expected when you're born into a culture like that. But like I mentioned, be it my father or my mother, not only were they comfortable challenging that, they were beyond comfortable in bringing up in a way that we were not limited by the stereotypes that the world had drawn already. I mean, what can a girl do? What can you do as a member of the society? What is the role of the father? What is the role of the mother? I mean, they have made tremendous sacrifices to shape and build. All three of us, I have 2 older brothers. It is a joke in the family. Where I grew up in Chennai, we had 25 chicken, a couple of ducks, and a bit of paddy growing in the portico because my mom just thought it was going to be a great idea. All this in the midst of a concrete jungle. I mean, that's how much my family loved nature, and they were trying to recreate things that we otherwise would miss out because we were living in the heart of the city. So my father is a writer. He abandoned an incredibly exciting career, the peak of his success, so that he could write Christian plays and spend more time with us as a family. He was a filmmaker. He quit that. And my mother, she abandoned her career in the space of being a scientist so that she could keep the family together, but at the same time, ensure that none of us were limited by what could otherwise be limiting, especially for a girl child, you know. There were always things like, oh, haven't you taught your daughter how to cook? Haven't you taught her how to do X, Y, and Z? No, my parents were all about, she has wings and we want her to fly.
Wonderful.
And even growing up with two boys, again, this is very culture specific. It is unusual for young girls like me to be playing football with boys. It's very unusual in that part of the country. But I was encouraged. I was not just encouraged, I was also sent for camps, sent for as many opportunity there was for me to learn a bit more about life beyond the four protected walls that I received. So that is a bit of my upbringing. From there, being a lawyer was a natural choice because I deeply cared about justice. Street theater, I think, was kind of there in my blood because of my father's background and my mother's background in arts and theater. What we were unfamiliar with as a family was violence. I mean, there was a lot of love within that household, but my encounter with violence kind of changed and pivoted the pace with which I started being conscious about social problems around the world. And I think that led me to the work that I care deeply about, that led me to who I am today. And that leads me and continues to guide me to what I want to be doing with all that I have. Inequality seems to be the order.
Thank you for sharing that, Anu. So you grew up in Chennai.
Mhm.
Now, that's the southern part of India, correct?
Yes.
So regionally speaking, how is there a difference, say, for someone growing up in Chennai, someone growing up in Delhi, someone growing up in Mumbai, and also growing up in a Christian home in a predominantly Hindu culture? How was that for you, experiencing interactions with your friends and family? Can you share a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Chennai, my childhood was delightful. I mean, we had a community church where we used to go every Sunday, but we were extremely involved in all things church activities. I think this is what happens, right? When you're a minority and when you're kind of different in a country, you tend to worry about things that really matter. By no means am I disregarding a lot of problems that Christians in Canada might experience, but for me, I often think of what the situation would be for those who are Christians in countries where you're not allowed to be. Think of Korea. To be a Christian means truly being willing to surrender yourself to God in its truest sense. It equals death because you could be persecuted for following your faith. When I think of what it meant for me then, it was not really different at the school that I went to, the community that I was in. We were separate, but still very much part of the cultural fabric because that's the kind of country India is. It's unity and diversity.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think a lot of my childhood I spent not really understanding the nuances of what it means to be different as far as your faith is concerned. I had the opportunity to be different in a very secular environment, and I didn't take it slightly now when I know what it means to be a minority individual in a majority country. But what it did do is it made us three, including my two older brothers, sometimes stand out in certain conversations. I still remember I used to take auto rickshaw to travel from school to maybe some other place that I need to be getting to. We build relationships with all of these guys. It's not impersonal at all. We know these auto rickshaw drivers by name. We know what goes on in their family. We know where their children are studying or if they need anything and all of that. And most of the journey at that point, we didn't have cell phones. So how do you pass time? You have conversations. You get involved in each other's life. One episode I remember is when I was having this conversation with this guy. He was talking about things that were going on in his family and about how his child wants to become a doctor and he's trying to find a good school. And I was like, oh, there is this excellent school there and this, that, and the other. And he stopped the auto rickshaw and he was like, I want to ask you something. I mean, you're such a young girl and I've been taking on this auto rickshaw ride for almost 3 years now. And are you a Christian? And I was like, yeah, I mean, why? Oh, no wonder, because anytime there is anything, we observe that Christians tend to respond to the needs of those who are usually not, even spoken to. People don't usually care. And I kind of forgot about that incident. I didn't think of it till you asked me. So yeah, it is an interesting setting that I have grown into. It has been an interesting observation that I was forced to make when you asked me this question.
Yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's a great story. So we're sitting here. You're now the executive director of IJM Canada. Is there a certain particular point in time that changed things for you? It sounds to me from what you've said so far that there's been this ongoing steady progression towards your education and this path of justice that you're on. Is there anything specifically that put you on this path so many years ago, or has this been a constant ongoing progression?
I mean, I always knew I was going to be focused on justice issues because the place where I was growing up, there was a ton of inequality, just unbelievable degrees of inequality. My constant question was, but that's not right. And I think I came to a lot of those conversations with people in power with a sense of entitlement. I came in saying, the law provides us with this, so I deserve to have it, versus this is not fair. I think it is two very different approaches you take. For me, I started with that approach, a huge sense of entitlement. And there were several things I was trying to do with what I thought I had as my top skills, which was theater, which was knowing a bit of law. And I got very invested in working with street children in Mumbai. But even with families who were living very close to my school, who were not able to afford a decent education, I was using street theater as a tool to get them closer to being excited about education, to talk about what it takes to lead a life without violence and whatnot. For me, I think the switch really happened was when I personally encountered violence. When I was running literally from one city to another in fear for my life, but more than that, fear for, things that I had lost because of violence, and the fear of being found out, and the fear of knowing that my qualifications, my contacts with whatever did not necessarily come in handy when I was violated the way I was. So running from one city to another was an experience which shaped me. I went to this strange city with barely any money. I remember having 1,500 rupees, which is a couple of dollars, and having to stay in conditions that nobody would be excited to stay, and just feeling very unsafe, feeling very vulnerable. I had the option to go back home if I was not riddled with fear. Home was a safe place, but I also felt this need to prove something, that to tell myself that I was going to be able to overcome this. But again, violence caught up. I was beaten up in this new city too. And this time for doing the work that I so believed in educating children, getting them access to school and whatnot. And when I came back home, I had to be brought back home because I was physically not in a position to, physically and mentally not in a position to take decisions for myself or even transport myself from anywhere. I ended up spending a considerable amount of time processing my life. I was not very mobile. I was confined to the bed for a very long time. And the thing that kept coming back to me is, Anu, you were doing something and you thought you were doing the right thing. Maybe it is, but how you're doing it is hugely flawed. I sincerely thought education was the solution to ending poverty. I sincerely believed in it. And hence my past life investment in education. And I did a lot of teaching, I did a lot of research, everything to, get those who did not have the opportunity to go to school, get excited about going to school. However, the barrier to getting that work done was something that I didn't think quite well enough of. Violence. Violence stood in between anything and everything that people like you and me want to offer. You could be digging up wells in Africa so that people can get water, but if you're raped on the way to, fetching a pail of water, what does that say? Free education if you're violated on the way to that. So that stuck with me, and I think I was praying and hoping for a break when I could walk again, so that I could invest myself in doing things the right way the second time around. That really was a turning point in my life. And everything else after that episode in 2009 was directed to finding a way to address injustice in a way it's sustainable, in a way it is meaningful, in a way that it is not dependent on, say, a Anu or an organization. And hence, International Justice Mission just blew my mind away a decade ago. And I knew that's where I needed to be.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that transparency. I'm sure your story is going to really impact a lot of people. I read first and had my own realizations and notions about poverty recalibrated when I read the book, The Locust Effect, and
Yeah.
the interplay of violence and poverty. Poverty will never be abolished until violence is abolished. We're hearing from Manu Canjanathoppil, Executive Director of International Justice Mission Canada. Stay tuned as we hear more about her life, her journey to IJM, and the frontlines work of International Justice Mission. Anu, your surname, Canjanathoppil. Everyone has a story about their names. What's the history behind your name, if you'd like to share that?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking. I mean, it's one question I hope somebody asks me because, because it's a long tongue twister of a name, it is so much more convenient to drop it, even when introducing me. Well, as is the culture across the patriarchal world, daughters don't get their father's name or their father's family name. I am expected to take on my husband's name, or even if I do take my father's name, you just take the George, which is his name, but not the family name. But there was something unique about my father's history. And Canjanathoppil family was, as a tradition, I mean, that family name was relatively new because his great-great-great-grand uncle was a part of the royal family in Trivandrum in Kerala. This was the time where the British had colonized and was still under the British rule. And there was a gross injustice that happened in that royal family. My grand uncle's brother was murdered by a British officer. So he wanted to take revenge. And the way it was structured in that part of the world at that time is India was split into 4 presidencies. So all things legal, courts and everything, he wanted to file a case and challenge and, get justice. You could only do this you'll have to go to Madras, now Chennai, then Madras, to file a case. But for that, you also needed to know English. So basically, justice was not accessible to him. And he was trying to figure out how to learn English. And a Lutheran missionary had just come to that part of India, and she offered to teach him. And he learned through the English and the Malayalam version of the Bible. And by the end of it, he realized that he didn't want to further the case. He chose to forgive. And he chose to exit from the royal family, and he chose to become a Christian. So that was how the Kanjanam family, Kanjanam means gold. And it's kind of ironic, because the royal family owns the most wealth globally. It's just an incredible wealth that they have. But he chose to leave behind his title. He chose to leave behind the wealth. And all he had was the name gold attached as a family legacy. And from there started the Canjanathoppil clan. And
Wow.
my grandfather was one of the first missionaries, so to say, in that part. So they lived in poverty, but they had a lot of joy. 9 children, including my father. And all of them took on to the path of serving, but none of them kept the Canjanathoppil name. And I was like, I need that piece of history. I need that name in my name. Hence, Canjanathoppil became mine.
Wow, that's a powerful name. The sense that he abdicated the material to embrace the greater legacy. You mentioned poverty in there. A lot of Westerners, our only notion of India are movies such as Slumdog Millionaire and Lion and those. Do you have any comments on those types of movies and how that portrays India?
I love anything and everything to do with arts and anything that's creative. So the way I look at it, I could criticize as much as I want to, but people have the creative freedom to represent anything in the way that they want to. So movies like Slumdog Millionaire does make me flinch, does make me cringe, but it's not that a lot of it is not true. Sometimes truth is so much more stranger than fiction. And because of the field that I'm in, because of the work that I've been doing, I've been exposed to incredibly crazy stories that makes me challenge and question just the impossible nature of human beings to impose or enslave others. I've heard and I've been part of just crazy stories that are as real as it can get. So any representation of any country can be viewed through any lens.
That's right.
My take on that is always, what lens do you choose to wear? When you're watching or when you're hearing about, say, a country like India. It's also an incredibly beautiful country with an incredibly rich heritage. Yes, inequality exists. Inequality exists in the United States of America too. Inequality exists in Canada too. The separation between the most powerful and the powerless is so much more farther in developed countries sometimes, I would think. So my invitation to people often is, yes, when you look at me, when you look at my country, please do refer the TED Talk of the one story and how that can fail a lot of us, because there are so many dimensions to reality. And I think it is important to approach reality with a different lens.
Yeah. Thank you. So you're now sitting in Ontario, Canada. How did you make your way from India to Canada?
Good question. It wasn't my decision. I have always thought that I was called to be in a developing country. I was in Canada in 2010 with McGill University as a Sauvé Fellow at the Jean Sauvé Foundation. So I left Canada so that I can go to the field and serve. I had always thought that I was called to be in the most uncomfortable place. And there came a time where I realized that I was most comfortable in the uncomfortable space. So I was initially nudged, later pushed, and later forced to understand. And it was a rude awakening, really, when my team has had to make the choice of one rescue over the other for want of resources. You start listening. You start listening to what God wants you to do. And I think that's what happened. So my husband and I often joke about it. It was not even a nudge. It couldn't be a clearer invitation to go to a place where I would feel the most uncomfortable to begin with, by virtue of just being a custodian of these stories that, I've encountered on a daily basis. And that's how it happened. It was a combination of miracle, and it was very clear. It was clear as day that we had to move here as a family. I still remember I was wondering if I should sign on the offer letter accepting. And I really thought I was not going to be making the interview. I was like, okay, God, I will go. I will go give this interview. But then that you call me to be here in India, in the most uncomfortable place to be doing this kind of work. So I'm just doing it because I want to make sure that I'm being obedient. So I didn't realize. And at the same time, we were trying to be parents. Sachin and I it has been my prayer for almost a decade. And the doctor kept telling me, Anu, it's your job, I said, no, I'm not stressed out. I said, no, you think you're not. You think because you're being efficient at your workplace, you think everything is in order. But that is what is coming in the way. Health-wise, you're great. But I don't think you can be a mother till you can step out of this work situation. I was processing that, and step by step leading towards the interview. Interview happened. I was wondering if I should sign the offer letter. Prayed. Finally signed. And I discovered the coming week that I was pregnant.
Wow.
So I come to Canada 8 months pregnant, the last day that I'm permitted to fly.
And here you are.
Here I am.
Amazing. That's amazing. Slavery comes in many forms: forced labor, bonded labor, chattel slavery, dependence, and forced marriage. Slavery still plagues 40 million human beings worldwide, of which 26% are children. Slavery is one of many gross injustices that IJM tackles head on. We'll now turn our focus to the work of International Justice Mission. Let's chat a little bit about IJM. So for people that aren't familiar with IJM or International Justice Mission, the work you do emancipates people from slavery and works towards fairer justice systems. You also work to eradicate sex trafficking, sexual violence against children, citizenship rights abuses, police abuse of power, land theft, and much more. From what I know, IJM currently works in 11 countries in a variety of ways. I've had a little bit of experience working alongside IJM in Bolivia a few years ago, visiting some people, getting to know some people down there in a collaborative effort when I was down there with World Vision. So can you share with us a few of your own experience in some of these countries and the associated societal issues that people could learn from in terms of the work that IJM is doing right now?
Absolutely. I mean, IJM is the world's largest anti-slavery and trafficking organization. And like you mentioned, we work in communities around the world to fight modern-day slavery, human trafficking, and other forms of violence against the poor. Our model for change is unique. Not only do we partner with local authorities to rescue victims and restore survivors, but we emphasize on convicting perpetrators and actually transforming broken public justice systems so that we can effectively protect the poor and the most vulnerable. As of last year, actually 2019, our partners and IGM have rescued more than 53,000 people from slavery.
Wow.
And other violent forms of oppression. And we're helping justice systems protect more than 150 million. So I just feel like all of us at IGM have this incredible opportunity to be part of this beautiful story of transformation. A couple of years ago, our vision was to be able to rescue thousands. We exceeded that. And now we're rewriting that. Now we want to protect 500 million. And we would get there. The stories that my team and I have been a part of have just revealed to me time and again, because when people think of the work of slavery or sex trafficking, it just seems like this most hopeless space to be working in. Oh, how much can you be doing? The more you do, the more people are going to be stepping back in, the more they're going to be, yes, I mean, it does appear to be that way because human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry and the beneficiaries of slavery are all sitting here. Every single person who's listening to this podcast, we are all beneficiaries of this unequal, unfair, cruel system of slavery. And we often wonder, what is it that we can do about it? I mean, I think of this rescue of this young girl who was tricked into her family actually was tricked into believing that she was going to have a good life. She was just 5 years old. She was 5 years old. And the family was given a whole lot of money and they took her from there. First took her into domestic servitude, but sexually exploited her. Then sold her for sex trafficking, after she was 15. A minor, young, I mean, the childhood of this baby was robbed. And when I think, her name is Kashi, when I look back and think of the hundreds of thousands of Kashis out there, who don't even know what it is to be free, who don't understand the concept of being free. And now that I'm in a different setting than I'm used to being, I'm like, what should we be doing? What should our response be? Obviously, I mean, organizations like IGM are stepping in and standing in between the perpetrator and the victim and helping them becoming a survivor and making sure that the public justice system is working. All of this is all right, but none of this is going to be sustainable if we don't band up and come together believe, the perpetrators are more connected than we are. The good guys are not as connected as we should be. So the solution really lies within us, making that decision to be a little bit more aware of the choices, expensive choices that could cost a 5-year-old her childhood, that could cost people as old as my grandparents living a life in slavery for 4 generations. I mean, those choices come with a cost. I think that's one thing that we as Canadians can be invited to as a space to think of. What do we choose to do when we know that this is reality? We are responding to COVID right now. It's a global pandemic. I would say that slavery has been an ongoing pandemic that we choose to overlook because it is inconvenient. We choose to overlook every time we're looking for a cheaper, fast fashion option, when we look for those sardines in a tin, when we look for, anything that ends up on our plate that we purchase. I could go on, but there are several stories, Rob, but I think the pith and substance lies in coming close to understanding how we can either be part of the story in a meaningful way or part of the story in a way that the ending is horrific.
That's right.
Yeah,
and I think a strong tendency in Western countries is to sit back and be an audience and have a degree of empathic assent without really getting involved and being part of the solution. And we're familiar with many of these situations, the sex trafficking, the slavery, the enslavement on ships in Southeast Asia, indentured slaves for seniors, the brothels that young girls to older women are trapped in. I just saw some horrific things when I was in El Alto in Bolivia, seeing these brothels that really from the outside looked like entombed mausoleums. It was just so horrible, no windows, and these women that are there for so many years and get paid such minimal amounts, and these men that are lining up around the blocks to pay for their services. And we have a responsibility to step in for those who are unable to protect themselves. And the beautiful thing about what IJM is doing in this is that you are working with police forces to eradicate corruption within law, and you're working for judicial reformation, which is absolutely integral to make these things change. We can't have this change unless that piece is happening. There's also cyber sex trafficking that's happening predominantly in the Philippines right now. And so we tend to look at the perpetrators. Here's these horrible men that are complicit in these things, in which they are. But we are all complicit in very subversive ways in our buying purchases, buying practices, and ways of just doing the ostrich effect, sticking our heads in the ground and just pretending, okay, this doesn't exist because I have an entitlement to cheap clothing.
Yeah, you mentioned cyber sex trafficking. The perpetrators are from here, right here in Canada.
Yeah.
We have seen how the shift has happened. We have seen how in Cambodia, when we started, we were like, okay, minor girls are so easily available. We were able to bring down that percentage. I mean, it was 2 digits anyway, 86%, 2 point something percentage. But perpetrators get creative. And like you mentioned, online child sexual exploitation has been their alternate way of creating an opportunity. So when we are here in the season, COVID, high-speed internet, it's enough, a couple of dollars to purchase a child's freedom and sex. Yeah.
Yeah. For us to get our minds around it, because I think there's this false sense of separation through, well, that's not my child, or even through the internet, that's not harming somebody. And we all need to do our part to be a voice and to advocate against this gross injustice. Are there a few things right now that IJM is just diligently working towards, that you need some assistance, you need some advocacy, you need some financial support, that the Canadian public is able to come on board and walk side by side with you in?
Absolutely. Right now, we are having, as you mentioned, you've been to Bolivia. We have had judicial experts come in and offer training. Judges are training judges, prosecutors are training judges. We are having an excellent exchange program that is happening to make sure that there is best practices transfer happening to from this country to other parts of the world, Bolivia being an excellent example. We are also trying to find if there is, an RCMP person we can permanently station in Philippines so that we can monitor these international cases of child exploitation. It is so crucial because a lot of demand is coming from Canada, and that requires resources, that requires planning, that requires making sure that we are able to facilitate this international, not just investigation, but also follow up and care for all of these victims who are being victimized because of the demand that is generated in developed countries. Resources, obviously, that definitely is a huge gap. We are looking at 40.3 million people. And every time somebody says, okay, Anu, you've rescued 10,000 people, your organization has rescued 53,000 people and counting. Like, yes, but there is so much more to do. It is not just rescuing, but it's to be able to protect 500 million, which means that the system needs to respond to the poorest of the poor, the least, the last, the lost. And how do you do that? How do you shift the fear that now resides in the hearts of the victim to the perpetrator? How do you make sure that these repercussions and consequences are made so much of a deal that you think twice before you exploit an oppressed person? That requires serious advocacy. That requires serious resources to be able to identify partners around the world. Certain rescues that we have, like you said, a rescue from the ship, a fishing vessel. This guy jumped off the boat for freedom. He could have died, but he still jumped off the boat because it was worth it. His freedom was more than worth it. But his rescue and rehabilitation, this required 3 international agencies because this is cross-border trafficking. There is a lot more conversation. There is a lot more accommodation that we need to be finding. Citizenship, there's multiple layers of challenges in doing rescues like this. And that calls for resources, that calls for networks. And then as far as advocacy is concerned, the supply chain legislation is such a crucial piece of legislation, which basically ensures that Canada does not benefit from goods that are tainted with slavery or human trafficking. And Canada, unfortunately, is the only country, the G20 countries, which has not gotten a legislation in place. So that is also a crucial space that we would like to be a partner with the government to see what it is that we can do together. All the organizations should be able to come forward, but also people who are listening to this, people who are in power, in spaces of influence. These are tangible, crucial steps that can contribute. And yeah, with COVID, just for 3 months after COVID, we have seen an unprecedented increase in violence, 129% of increase in violence cases just in one city. You can imagine we are all safe in the lockdown when you're hiding in the house, but you're basically staring at a whole population out there, which is particularly unsafe in lockdown. Women living with their perpetrators or children who are trapped with perpetrators who are going to be abusing them for money. So the needs are increasing. We want to be able to send more investigators, more lawyers, more social workers, more partners on the field, kind of the hub and spoke. They experience the ripple effect. The more the rescues, the more the system reform you're going to be able to influence. And that really calls for Canadians coming together, wanting to rally together for a good fight that can address injustice that is global.
Yeah. And I think so much of the Canadian public does want to come on board and help. And IJM is such a great vehicle to step out from that participation vantage point and actually get involved actively. And it's hard. We have a duty to educate ourselves. For instance, I was just recently looking into diamond importation. And most Canadian jewelers subscribe to the Kimberley certificates, which state, as far as their writing goes, that these imported diamonds that they have come from non-conflict zones. But there's only a handful of them that do. Conflict zones can be actually put in with these other diamonds because they're mass shipped. Doesn't mean that it's not unethical. So slavery can still happen there.
Absolutely.
So people are falsifying themselves thinking, oh, I'm doing a good thing. So there's a lot of corporate virtue signaling going on. Yeah. And it's really incumbent upon us to educate ourselves in what we can do to step in, because if we were right beside these children that are getting exploited, that are working in these slave-like conditions, we wouldn't stand for it at all. But just like the cybersex trafficking, where people feel that it's removed and it's not hurting, it is hurting. Can you comment on any other countries that you are working in? I know that you have a strong presence in Nepal as well, and Cambodia, Bolivia, Philippines, any other countries or issues that Canadian public should hear about that they may not know about right now?
In Kenya, we address police abuse of power. And I'm sure you're familiar with the story where I lost a colleague. He was murdered while he was taking a witness for a court hearing. And the case is still running. So the work that we do there, it's basically addressing an unequal level of power and what that can do to those who have been illegally detained in the prisons. We are also present in Ghana. We are also addressing issues around violence in Latin America. Romania, we recently opened an office to specifically address violence. The work of IJM is structured in such a way that we are trying to work ourselves out of our jobs. We are present in, over 20 countries, but the hope is that we are able to shut down operations and walk away from one country to another. So we recently closed one field office operations because the public justice system is spectacularly positioned to address the injustices there. And that really is the way that we hope to play. It's a player-coach model. The last thing we want to be is indispensable in any country that we work in. And the work that we do always is in partnership with the communities, most importantly, the government. Because if it was any other way, then when you exit, the solution to the problem also exits with you. And that's been the approach that we have taken.
Well, thank you for that, Anu, and thank you for sharing your time with us. It's just been such a pleasure to get to know you a little bit, your passion for justice. You have such a quality of kindness and mercy in your approach to it, all cloaked in humility. So it's just such a great fit for this podcast. Do you have any closing comments that you'd like to share before we sign off?
Yes, I do. A couple of years after now, people are going to be looking at 2020 as a year that was historically significant because of COVID. A couple of years from now, we are going to be ending slavery. We are definitely ending slavery. And we're going to get there because I have seen what is possible through partnerships. I've seen this in South Asia. And we are staring at a vaccine to address this gigantic problem. And my invitation to those who are listening to this is, do you want to be part of that? And come alongside and have an answer for our children, our grandchildren, about what role we played when slavery was at highest ever historically. I mean, never before in the history of mankind has slavery been this high of a problem. It is now. So we have an opportunity to sit and watch history happen, or we have an opportunity to take part in a great movement and come together and end this together. So I invite you to that space, and thank you for being interested in justice. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here listening to this podcast. So thank you for doing that. And I invite you to the work of justice. I also invite you to understanding how you can partner and do this together. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anu. And as you said, let's all be on the right side of history and be participants rather than an audience. For more information on Anu, the work of IJM, please visit ijm.ca. That's ijm.ca. Thanks for sharing your time with the 6/8 Culture podcast, where we share stories of personal transformation that are making our world a more just, kind, and humble place. Join us for our next session of Impacting Stories with 6/8 Culture. This is Rob McKinley signing out with a reminder for us all to act justly, to be kind, and to walk humbly.